Hello, welcome everybody to Ask a Chemist. My name is Charlie. I'm one of the technicians at the Chemistry Teaching Lab in Oxford. Today we have a talk by Kieran, who is going to discuss what he does for his career in chemistry. If you have any questions, there should be a question and answer bar on the side of the screen. So hopefully you'll be able to ask your questions there. So I'm going to hand over to Kieran to give his presentation.
Thank you, Charlie. Hello, I'm Kieran and I am a chemical emergency responder. I'm going to give a short presentation which will introduce myself, the company I work for, what I do, and will open the floor for questions. One moment and I will begin the presentation. So, about myself, I started at a state school on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and I wanted to go to university and do something chemistry related. So I ended up going to Keble College in Oxford to do my Masters, my MChem, and finished in July 2019. At the end of all that, I realised that I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I did want to use my degree, but I found that generally companies that specify a chemistry degree wanted to spend some time in the labs, and I at least knew I didn't want to do that. So I ended up finding a job at the National Chemical Emergency Centre. The NCEC started as a government body that was privatised and sold to eventually become part of Ricardo Energy and Environment, which is an environmental consultancy based in Harwell, just south of Oxford. My job is mainly to answer calls about chemical emergencies and to provide advice over the phone, talking people through response and remediation. Level 1 response is at the level of providing first aid advice or spillage cleanup advice over the phone. Post-privatisation, we expanded into the commercial sector and now provide advice for more than 600 companies worldwide. So where do we fit into a standard chemical supply chain? So a general chemical supply chain would begin at a manufacturer before being transported on the roads, rail, planes, however. And during that transport, they'll be stored in warehouses before the final leg of the journey is completed by a courier to the end user, be they a professional in a lab or a member of the public. That's not the full life cycle though, because at the end of all of that, it needs to be disposed of into a council-run tip or through some other waste stream. So at any point, something can go wrong. And that means that at any point in the supply chain, I can get a call. So it is helpful to know a little bit about a lot of different parts of these supply chains so you can speak to people correctly in words and language that they understand. So I've said it a few times. What is a chemical emergency? We define it as any chemical incident which threatens people, the environment, assets, or reputation. So, for examples, a threat to people would be if somebody contacted a strong corrosive. The environment would be release of a chemical that, if it got into a lake, would strip the oxygen and cause a lot of plant and animal life to die off. Threats to assets would be a vehicle rollover, a plant burning down, something like this. And we are also involved in reputation management. So we notify companies if we receive calls from the media or from solicitors in combination of any of the above incidents. So as for common incidents, the usual ones are fires or spills or exposures, but we do get some slightly more interesting and niche calls. For example, identifying an illicit lab over the phone for the fire service or police. So a typical day is actually quite hard to pin down because every day is different, every call is different, and more to the point, every caller is very different. So generally what would happen would be I would go into the office and then be on call and working in shifts. My day begins traveling into that office at 11 p.m. or 7 a.m. or 3 p.m. and having a chat with the shift before me. So we can complete a handover. If there's anything ongoing, anything that I should know about that could come back during my shift, because there can be big, long-running incidents which happen over the course of days. But as I said before, the main responsibility is taking calls. That can be a challenge because you've got to identify the company that you're acting for, you've got to provide advice, and you have to keep the caller on the line. So to do that, you've got to be responsive and reassuring, talk to them in words, in sort of language that they understand, know where they're likely to have found the product information, and guide them to give you the information you need to make an assessment that can then help them manage the spill, fire, or exposure. And at the end of all that, we then need to notify the relevant company, usually first by phone, then by email, and then by a call report. But because the phone isn't normally ringing off the hook, we have about one call from the fire service each day and about 10 to 20 other calls on the more commercial lines. We also have projects which support the wider NCEC business area. These can be things like providing training to the fire service, keeping company contact lists up to date, make sure that we've got the appropriate documentation that we need to do our job correctly, and also supporting other business areas nearby. So that could include notifying product safety data sheets at European poison centres so that companies can sell these products in France or Germany or wherever they're trying to sell them. So all in all, I do find this to be quite an interesting first job. I really enjoy helping people with difficult situations, and I've learned a lot about a wide variety of different things. Would you believe it? I've even managed to get over any phone anxiety that I once had. But with that is the end of this section of it, just a brief overview. And I am happy to field any questions you might want to throw at me. Thank you.
So we don't have any questions, but I have one. At what point in your degree did you know that you didn't want to be in the lab?
I think it was when I got past the halfway point. So to provide a bit of context, at Oxford, the undergraduate masters, the MChem, is 4 years long. I was, and for the first 3 years, you're spending up to 12 hours in about 6 weeks out of every 8 in the labs, rotating between the organic labs, the inorganic labs, and the physical chemistry labs. The final year is 1 full year in a lab, usually, or there are a couple of different things you can do. And I think it was when I got to that sort of halfway point, the end of the second year, and when a lot of my focus was going towards the big exams at the end of the third year, and just seeing the fourth year as a monolith of time spent in the lab. It turned out like that. I did well out of it, but I just wanted a change. I wanted to have something that was a bit different, and I found this job.
So we've had a question as well. It sounds like a lot of different things in a day. What's your most unusual call?
My most unusual call is a good one. Trying to think here. So we don't get too many calls about illicit labs, but they are exciting when they do happen. We also, and sometimes we can get calls trying to identify, is this a chemical explosive, a chemical munition, something along these lines. Most unusual. Actually, I'm going to change that slightly. I've only had one call about a coral poison exposure that a family had. So sometimes there are. We got a call from the fire service because they were attending an incident where I think somebody was cleaning out a fish tank and they had boiled water in the kettle. They'd poured it over a section of their of this fish tank to clean it. They kept some coral. The coral thought it was under attack and releases a very, very toxic substance when doing so. I believe it's the second most toxic substance after botulinum toxin. And this, although nobody is recorded to have died from these from exposure to that toxin. And then I was talking through how to protect the fire service, what the ambulance service should look out for this this palytoxin exposure, and talking about how to safely clean the hard surfaces with a bleach solution, including radiators, so you don't vaporize the poison again. And what else? And yeah, I think that is my most unusual call because I have only had one of them so far.
I agree, that is quite unusual. And we've had another question in. How did you hear about this job? I hadn't heard of it before your talk.
Yeah, I know. I had never heard of this job before. I happened to bump onto it on a regular recruiting site. I was looking in the Oxfordshire area because of personal reasons, and when you're trying to limit it to something that isn't lab-based, that narrows things down quite a bit. I found but yeah, it was through a fairly dull, unusual route. It was just through Indeed or LinkedIn or something along these lines. But yeah, it's something that I think happens. It kind of happens behind the curtain. I didn't know this entire area existed before I got into it.
So another one, do you have to provide evidence to the police?
Do we have to provide evidence? We do not, in my experience. We occasionally get called by the blue light services, just to provide a little bit of context. We provide advice to the blue light services for any incident involving chemicals, if they choose to call us. This service is called ChemSafe and is paid for by the Department for Transport and the Chemical Industries Association. We can get called about anything on that line, whereas when we act for a commercial company, we can only provide advice for that company's products. So the question again was providing evidence to the police. We do not, in my understanding. Sometimes they will call us. We can respond with an email saying our recommendations and providing evidence linking to government sites or company websites explaining our logic. But we are, as far as I know, not. We don't end up in any sort of courtroom as sort of expert witnesses or anything like this. I believe that should answer the question.
Yep. So another one is, wow, the coral story sounds crazy, which I agree with. How did you hear about it before the call? And I suppose that kind of leans into like what training you had when you started as well then.
Yeah, so there is quite, as you might imagine, there's quite a lot of training. We do have a lot of resources to draw from, and the training took quite a few months. The average is about 4 to 6 months, but because I was beginning my training and then COVID hit, that ended up being extended to about 9, as people were trying to figure out how we do everything in the new sort of working from home world. So there were a lot of presentations about typical calls, a lot of looking through previous call reports to figure out what advice is provided when. and this was filed under the unusual calls we occasionally get. So the illicit labs, the palitoxin, like the coral toxins, or some other small call volume but potentially high impact. That was a separate presentation by itself. Because people build up skill and you might only have 1 or 2 of these calls in a year, we need to sort of have constant training to make sure that people aren't forgetting how to respond to a I don't know, a white phosphorus grenade that gets found when somebody's doing some litter picking. So we know how to provide the advice. And yeah, we just sort of got a constant rolling training. And if any of us find anything interesting, we let everybody else know. And ultimately, you're normally working alongside other people. You can always talk to them for a second opinion, and at any time of day or night, you can call up your manager to go, I haven't come across this one before. Is there anything you think I've missed?
So the question is, do you have to study a chemistry degree to do this job?
So the way NCEC hire is it is a chemistry degree or a chemical related degree, or having a wealth of experience in sort of chemical area. So I think in the team we have a very well, what was it? He spent a very long time working as a lab technician and is very, very familiar with the sort of bucket chemistry that we're often advising about over the phone. Bucket chemistry being, we've mixed 2 unknown quantities of some acid and something else, and it's doing something. What's going on? So he's very good at providing that sort of advice, and he's got some awareness of some of the less commonly used things in labs now, like picric acid I don't think is used as much in schools and is explosive when it dries out, but occasionally it gets found at the back of a fume hood in a school, so we'll get a call going, what do we do with it? But we have also had, I think we might have had biochemists or a chap with a forensics degree who have also worked in this same role. So it's sort of chemistry and adjacent, I'd say.
Can you do your job in other countries?
So I'm going to answer this 2 ways because I'm not sure exactly what the whether you mean me being located in another country or providing advice to somebody in another country. Providing advice to somebody in another country we do through a network of interpreters. So I only speak English, regrettably. So if I get a call from China or Germany in Mandarin or German, I need to speak clearly via an interpreter in a short sort of burst and explain what's going on and make sure that the interpreter, if the interpreter is unsure how to speak, how to say what an oxidizer is to somebody, if they're not a chemist themselves, then I need to break it down and explain it in words that are hopefully easy to translate. Those can be difficult, but once you get used to them, you can figure your way through it fairly well. As for doing the job in other countries, I think NCEC isn't the only company that does this role, and there are a fair few different companies that do similar jobs worldwide. So there are a few in the US, there's even a few in the UK, and there are sort of various offices who may use sort of local ones in different parts of Europe or in China. I think there is a state-run one as well. But yeah, so I hope one of those answers your question.
Are all the calls recorded?
So the calls are recorded in part to sort of protect us if somebody came back and said, no, you provided bad advice and we want to terminate our use of your service. And it also protects us if we got any harassing calls.
Can anyone call you, or do they have to be signed up to your company?
So it is we fit in a slightly strange place. So on the commercial side of the business, we are the number that gets called if something's gone wrong with their products. And so our telephone numbers could be on safety data sheets. They could be on the hazardous chemicals placards on the back of vehicles on the roads, on rail tankers, or potentially they could be up in warehouses that if there's a spill in a courier's warehouse, say, they can then call us. So we've got a lot of public facing numbers, and it is free at the for the caller to call us to get the advice. The companies who use our numbers and use our service are the ones who pay us and get the ability to put our telephone numbers on their documentation.
Is the job well paid?
It was reasonably well paid for a first job, in my opinion. So for scale, I have been on the phone lines for just over a year now, and I am earning around 30,000, which suits me fine.
Do you have to be insured to do your job?
Not personally insured, but I believe through the company we are.
Yeah, I imagine I'd have to have some kind of insurance.
Apparently we've got very good insurance, yes. So on that note, I have not explained that there are certain incidents where we cannot provide advice because our insurance doesn't cover them. Specifically for explosives. So I've mentioned chemical explosives or explosives labs. We can help to identify them, but ultimately we will be recommending that the fire service call the explosive ordnance disposal, the bomb squad, to come in because they're the experts. We are not. There are so many different subdivisions of explosives that I can't quite get my head around. So I'm a chemist, not a sort of explosive specialist. We also cannot provide advice on infectious or medical substances. So if we got a call about an anthrax scare, we can provide initial advice of keep away, maybe consider using sort of soap or bleach or something along these lines, but we're going to be referring the fire service in that case to the public health executive, like Health and Safety, Public Health England, if they're in England, or the equivalent in the other nations of the UK. And we cannot provide advice on radioactive substances because those are their own, they have their own peculiarities, and a lot of information about dosage and exposure and what's safe and what isn't. So, and in all cases, if we got called by a member of the public, we would be saying, call the emergency services, dial 999 now.
So what can your job lead onto? What might you do in the future? Are there any promotions at your work?
So, as I've mentioned, we have a fair few side sort of projects. We do projects in between getting calls, and through doing those projects, we can potentially move sideways into those areas, whether that's into safety data sheet authoring or a more regulatory side of the business, or if you want to go into sales of the products and services that we do. Those are all routes that people have done in the past. It's part of a wider consultancy, so there's a lot of opportunity to get involved in other consulting projects. More vertically, you can move from being an emergency responder, as I am, to one of the managers, the senior emergency responders, which means that you're not working on shifts, but you could get woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning if the person on shift does need a hand with a difficult problem. And for anything outside Ricardo or NCEC, I can see it leading into things like the civil service or working at PHE, which is Public Health England, or which is part of the civil service, or there are similar things, more about disaster preparedness, at Porton Down as well.
So you talk about other languages. Can you learn another language as part of your training?
That isn't something that I am aware of. I think there are some learn another language groups, just as sort of social things, but as part of the training, I'm not sure I could get my Russian up to scratch in 6 months or so in order to provide advice in these quite high pressure situations over the phone. So in short, no.
What parts of your degree prepared you for your job?
Ooh, what parts of my degree prepared me for this job? I would say the working to deadlines and getting used to pressure were a sort of subtext of an undergraduate at university. And that is something that I've got very used to now. So beyond that, having the confidence to sort of speak to the people who need help and sounding authoritative in doing so is something I got out of the tutorial system at Oxford. So those are the soft skills. In terms of more technical chemistry related things, there have been points where I've been asked a really odd question, like, can fentanyl react with acid to make something nastier than fentanyl, which is an opiate and very toxic? And I couldn't find anything about this through our usual resources, because whenever you look up fentanyl, it's always about treatment of somebody who might have overdosed, or it's always something, that's what the health advice is usually about. And reactions are normally about the person's reactions to the drug, which is, again, not what I'm looking for. So there have been points where I've looked up a literal picture of the molecule and from my awareness as a chemist gone, right, acid might protonate to this bit, or a base might sort of deprotonate something here. Is that going to lead to it generating any gas? Is that going to lead to it falling apart to make anything that I know of as being very toxic? And sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes just recognizing that it won't and stating that to the emergency services is the helpful thing.
A follow-up one in relation to what is Porton Down?
Fair enough. Porton Down was where historically it was where any sort of chemical weapons research was done during the Second World War, or biological research, I believe, what happened there. There are various myths about it going on just now, but it has been, as far as I'm aware, they have stopped anything that is sort of offensive based there. There might be various things about identifying if a nerve agent was used in the Middle East or something along these lines. But it's the sort of government-owned lab that looks at things along these lines. I'm just going to make sure I haven't missed something there. Apparently, this comes under Public Health England.
Yeah, I've watched a great documentary on BBC about Porton Down. It was really fascinating how they were getting rid of all the old World War II bombs and ordnance that have been found around. So I think it does a bit of everything. So another question is, did you enjoy your degree at Oxford? And then a follow-up one to that is, what made you choose Oxford as well?
Yeah, so overall, I did enjoy my degree. I do think it has sort of set me up pretty well to do an interesting job in an interesting enough place. As for what made me choose Oxford, I feel like there's a theme here, but sometimes it is just the shortest line between 2 points. So when I was finishing at secondary school, I was quite good at the academic side of things and knew I wanted to go to university. My next thinking was, what do I want to do at university? I enjoy maths, I enjoy physics, I enjoy chemistry, I enjoy the sort of sciences. I also enjoyed art and things, but I'd moved in a more sciencey direction as I finished school. Maths and physics, I thought, were good, but I wanted something that was dare I say, it felt a bit more real world, like I'm actually interacting with stuff in a lab. I changed my mind eventually, but I wanted to actually interact with stuff in real time as opposed to just theory. And I also thought that chemistry was a fairly central science. I could move towards physical chemistry or biological chemistry or forensic chemistry or something like this and take it in little steps like this. As for why Oxford, it was literally me going, I want to study chemistry. Where do I want to study it? I think Oxford's pretty good. I'll put my name down. I'll put it down on the UCAS form, and never expected to hear back from them. Definitely didn't expect it after my first interview went, in my opinion, very badly. But my second interview was absolutely fantastic. I think in part because I was relaxed, because I'd given up on any hope of getting into the university, and so I was made an offer was extended from Keble College, and I ended up at Keble College because I met my grades.
Nice. So someone said, you sound very calm, and it includes a smiley face. Do you ever get stressed by your job if there's a fire or a grenade or anything like that?
So thank you for saying that I sound very calm. I attempt to put on the customer service voice a little bit because it is sometimes what people expect, and you need to sound calm when somebody is concerned. If their child has eaten something and they're worried that their child might be very ill or die, you need to be reassuring. You need to sound like you know what to do and talk them through it clearly. So as for stress, there are points where the job is stressful because if there are a lot of calls coming in, I might be talking on one phone, just a relatively low level exposure, say. I've talked it through, I'm coming to the end of the call, but before I can wrap up, another phone goes off, and then I've got to sort of triage between the two to judge, can I finish this exposure call off? Is this a misdial? Is it somebody going, help, a train's derailed? So I think, particularly at the beginning, I was quite stressed, but I've learned to manage that and to sort of focus on the things that I can do and I can talk somebody through. And that has really helped ground me during quite tense situations. It's also helped if I've needed to speak quite clearly to somebody on the phone because of something that's gone wrong with in my personal life, if there's something that's gone wrong with a product or I need to get a return or something like this. So yeah, helpful skills.
So someone has said, I like your teamwork, which I agree. I have a bit of a follow on from that. Then how many people would be in your team and how many people would be on shift with you then? So if you're saying you have to answer 2 phones at the same time, is there multiple people there though? There
are, yes. So we have a team of currently 8 or just emergency responders. That's in the process of expanding to 10. And we have multiple managers so that they can sort of take in shifts or support us as need be. As for how these shifts work, there are currently 4 shifts in a day. Each one lasts about 8 hours, and you are on call for that time. So you have they last for 8 hours, and they start at 7 a.m., at 11 a.m., at 3 p.m. or at 11 p.m. So for the first half of the morning shift or the second half of an evening shift, or for the entire night shift, you may be lone working. As I say, though, you can always call the manager to wake them up and get some support if it's a very, very busy one. But the reason why it's done like that is because there are times where it's a lot busier, which is during extended European working hours. So we might get a call from Portugal at 7 o'clock in the morning UK time, for example, which might be closer to 9 o'clock for them. And then when we go to And then as the day gets busier, more people come in. We also have a system of what we call bank days, which are 36 9-to-5 days that you fit in around your shifts. And you, during that time, will be a backup caller. If the first two on-call emergency responders are busy, the next call that comes in will go to you as a bank day.
Someone has asked, what advice would you give to someone for applying to Oxford?
So for applying to Oxford, I would say be a very strong academic sort of credentials. And I would say that well, I've only had experience of the chemistry application. I can't remember whether there was always talk about bringing in a test to bring it in line with things like physics, where there was a written test that you would do as well. I do not know if that has actually started. Do you know that, Charlie?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm probably not the best person because I'm not really affiliated to a college, but I haven't heard of it happening, so.
Fair. It was being talked about for most of the time I was in undergrad, and I think they began trialing it. I'm not quite sure what happened. So I'd say be good at your academic stuff and be good at problem solving, because your interviews are usually run in a similar sort of style to the Oxford tutorial system. And that is, you will get you need to explain your reasoning going through various problems, which shouldn't be too difficult, but might be a little bit beyond what you've been doing at school. And it's you taking what you know and explaining what you think about it and taking that to a logical conclusion. As for applying to Oxford as well, because of the collegiate system, you get pretty much the same level. Well, there's sort of a split between collegiate and departmental teaching. So departmental teaching will be your lectures, it'll be your labs, but your tutorials will be run in college usually. Different colleges might say they have different sort of characters, so that can inform which one you want to apply to run, or they will be in different locations. Keble, where I applied, was right across the street from the chemistry department, so it was a very short walk to get to lectures in the morning, whereas somewhere like Magdalen is a bit further away, but historically has a bit more money, and there might be opportunity for more grants or things along these lines. So I'd say, because you apply to a college and not usually just the university, research the place that's going to fit you best if you are thinking about doing it.
Yeah, I think deciding on a college is something that people always have lots of questions about. I know the past students have said, oh, this was the prettiest one, I like this building the most, or this was, this had the lake, or this had the deer. So it's about personal preference really, isn't it? So another question is, how much holiday do you get?
So as I've said, we have I didn't actually explain that fully, sorry. We have about 4 days on shift and then 4 days off shift, usually as a sort of standard working pattern. So I have a block of evening shifts beginning tomorrow. So I'll be in the office from 3 p.m. till 11 p.m. on what day is it tomorrow? Wednesday? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we get 25 holidays in a year. But when you can get 12 days off from only using up 4 of them, that can be quite nice indeed.
That does sound quite nice. You must get a nice big stretch for not a huge amount of holidays.
You can do, yeah. It was like I just came off a block of holiday, and it was I've used 4 days and got, I think it was 13, because there was a little bit of shuffling between to get things back on track, and that was quite nice.
So the question is, do you always like chemistry?
I did, yes. I sort of started down a sort of, I quite liked space and things when I was younger, and that developed into a more broader appreciation of science, which then narrowed again to get me towards chemistry. I enjoyed it at school, and I enjoyed it at university, and I enjoy it now.
Good to know you still enjoy it then.
Yeah, I do. It's nice to still be using a bit of the bucket chemistry of, have we made chlorine? Yes, is usually the answer to that one.
So another question is, what was the best thing about Keble, and is there anything that you didn't enjoy as much?
So what did I enjoy? So what was the best thing about Keble? I really, like, it's maybe a bit of an acquired taste, but I quite liked the occasional formal hall. Keble has a I think it's got the longest dining hall in Oxford. It is sort of properly Hogwarts-like. And when I started, there were they changed how meals worked a little bit in my time there. So there were formal halls where Keble wasn't the most pretentious about it. You didn't need to turn up in a suit. You didn't need to turn up particularly sharply dressed as you might at other colleges, but you did need to wear your gown. On a Sunday, you would be sung at in Latin from the Minstrels Gallery, and that was a bit of a different experience to my time at a state school on the outskirts of Oxford. So I really enjoyed that. What did I not enjoy as much? So one thing that I wasn't the most keen on. So Keble also hosted a ball in the third term at Oxford, so in the sort of summer term type thing. And at the end of that, because there are pre-COVID, there were, I don't know, 2,000 people or so in milling around for 8 hours, listening to music or getting food or chatting or various things like this. The morning after, it was always trashed. There was always a huge amount of litter all over the quads, all over the paths and things like this. And that was never fun to wake up and sort of see out of your bedroom window when you are living in college. So I suppose the aftermath of things like that and the sort of conspicuous consumption and waste didn't sit very well with me.
Maybe just to clarify, because I know when I started in Oxford, it was a bit of a weird one, but what is your gown that you would have to wear to formals?
So because I admit I never quite managed to break into getting a consistent first every year, you wear, I was always wearing the commoner's gown. This is pretty much a rectangle down your back, two sort of longer rectangles over the plaited rectangles that sort of come down over your shoulder of the sort of black material. You need to wear this for formals, as I mentioned, or for sort of formal events like your matriculation, I believe, at the beginning of the year. I think you might need to wear it for graduation, but mine's been delayed several times due to COVID. I don't actually know. No, it's a different gown you wear for graduation. There are different sort of tiers of gowns, including if you are a scholar, like a choral scholar or an organ scholar, if you're in the choir or play the organ for your college, you can wear a scholar's gown, or I don't know if this is for done at every college, but if you consistently get a first equivalent at your end of year exams, you can wear a scholar's gown the following year, sort of thing, which is a bit bigger and fluffier, and swooshes when people are sort of running through the course to get somewhere on time, and then sort of you get more and more sort of detailed or more red that begins to come into it as you go through being like a professor to a fellow or things along these lines. And I don't quite understand how these ones all break down, but yeah, it's a bit strange at first, but you eventually get used to it.
So someone has asked, what is a formal? And also someone has said the holiday thing sounds great as well.
So a formal is a formal hall. So some usually for lunches, for example, in college, there will be a sort of canteen style served food, say that you go into the kitchens or whatever, and you get your plate and you pay for it, and then you go and sit down in the big long hall or whatever equivalent building at your college, and you'll just sort of sit and eat and chat with your friends or whatever. Formal halls are a bit more structured. You will, as well as wearing the gowns, there everybody sort of shuffles in at the same time, sits down, and courses are generally brought out to you by the hall staff. So it's first, and there's sort of various rituals about waiting for the people on high table. So again, in the Hogwarts analogy, think of like McGonagall, Dumbledore, or people like this. You wait for them to sit down and they get their food first, and then it's sort of people get given their food all the way down the long tables. Before you finish the course, that's taken away, and then the next course is brought out. At the beginning of it as well, there is usually a reading, sometimes in English, sometimes in Latin. It depends on the college, depends on the traditions. The graces basically might change from place to place and time to time. And then when high table end up leaving, usually you stand up as they sort of process out of the hall. It's a strange ritual, but again, something that I just became normal while I was there, and looking back at it and describing it now, it just seems strange once again.
I went to not a formal, but I got to go to high table at Christchurch College, and again, that was so interesting to see how it all works. So yeah, no, it's a fascinating place, Oxford. So we're running a little bit low on time. So if anyone has any further burning questions, it'd be good. Nothing's coming in yet, but I guess if we give people a few minutes maybe to write their questions in.
Yeah, can do.
There's one. Does your job take work experience people?
So work experience people, I don't know at present, because of the pandemic and there being a lot fewer people in the office than there were once. I think there might have been people who were getting work experience while they were at university who were there in the first few months when I was there before pandemic hit. So maybe still yes, but that is something that you might need to get in contact with NCEC themselves, and I'm not sure how. I'm not sure if there would be a sort of an opening in the emergency response area in particular, because there is a lot to get a handle on, and a lot of training before you are let loose answering these sort of phone calls by yourself.
Yeah, sure. I can't imagine the training would squeeze into the work experience window. So St. Catherine's School has said thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question is, do you recommend any books to read in relation to chemistry?
I admit I'm not the best. I'm not the best resource for books to read in relation to chemistry. I did joke when I was at university that as a chemist, I must be functionally illiterate, because I was comparing myself to all my sort of colleagues, all my friends and everybody else doing degrees. Everybody felt like they were having to write essays, even the physicists, even the engineers. The first essay that I had to write was in my third year in the exams. There were various textbooks that I referred to, but these are probably just going to be like your Atkins or things which are you will have on reading lists already. So I'm sorry to say I don't have any particular books to recommend.
Does anyone have any more final questions? We still have a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is a good one, actually. You said tutorials gave you confidence for your job. Can you say a bit more about tutorials, please? Are these like lessons? And I suppose tutorials are very different in Oxford compared to other universities, so it would be a bit niche for Oxford.
Yeah, so as I understand other universities, a tutorial is what in Oxford would be termed more of a seminar, in terms of you have several people who might have read up on a subject and then sort of having a sort of group discussion. Whereas in a tutorial, certainly in these chemistry tutorials that I was, where I was being taught, I would have a problem sheet or similar to go through, or some supporting reading to do around that subject, and then we would, and then it'd be me and maybe one other person with an academic, actually with my tutor, actually talking through what we were doing with these particular problems, how we got to where we are, and our sort of reasoning for the explanations for how we got there. So it's quite collaborative, and if there was anything that needed to be gone over after a lecture, if there was something that wasn't clicking, that's your opportunity to bring it up to your tutor, and they can actually sort of talk you through it, or can point you back towards the lecturer to say, because they are very good at fielding questions as well. So it's but in some other subjects like history or archaeology or something like this, anthropology, you would usually be sent away with a reading list. You would read through these books or sections of books to formulate an argument to respond to a sort of exam, not just exam style question, but something that almost gets you into the habit of writing, maybe gets you into the habit of almost writing papers or knowing what your argument is and producing these fast and arguing your point of view with confidence. I remember one that I heard about from an archaeologist, a friend of mine, well, anthropology and archaeology, was within her first term at Oxford, she was being asked to define, basically to define religion, and to see if there was actually a sort of specific definition, or inclusive sort of definition of religion. And she actually ended up, her gut feeling was, no, there isn't. After reading these things, I still think there isn't. But surely if the question's being asked, there has to be one. So she sort of groped towards an answer, saying, oh, maybe this sort of thing would sort of end up maybe it would end up defining it. The view of the academic was, yeah, I mean, you've made a decent argument, but what about this? What about that? Can you really say your definition still applies over here? And the answer was no. So according to at least this academic and my friend, defining religion is a bit of a not really necessary. That's a sort of sample question for you, for the sort of thing you could have to read up on and then argue at a tutorial. I'm not sure if there's something you want to add to that, Charlie.
No, that sounds like a horrible question to have to answer in a tutorial.
Yes, it was. I was listening
cruel.
to the rants from my friend when she was going, oh my word, I've got to do this one now.
I suppose it could be that thing of testing your logic and how you would approach a question as well, not necessarily what the question is. Mm-hmm. So someone has asked, is chemistry at Oxford very hard?
I found it quite hard. But then again, I've only done one degree, and I've only done one degree in chemistry at one university, so I can't really compare between different places. Something that makes it difficult, in my opinion, is how short the terms are. In undergrad, the terms are about 8 weeks long, and you have 3 of them, but you have sort of potentially multiple long problem sheets to get in every week. You've got up to 12 hours of labs every week. In the first year, you've got stuff on physics and maths as well, on top of 10 to, if you choose to go to them, like 12 to 14 hours of lectures as well. So you can very quickly fill up a week and a weekend, and then trying to do all the sort of standard university things on top of that starts. It feels a bit sort of time pressured. But then again, working to deadlines and getting that practice in and being able to actually have the just keep the momentum going is something that's helped me in my subsequent employment. So it was difficult, but I think worthwhile in terms of the broader skills we get as well.
Definitely more time constraints than when I was at uni anyway. So if we go for one final question being, you see explosions and chemical disasters in films. How like that is your job? Well,
I'm more like the I'm a little bit more like the person at fire control, just taking the 999 call or something along these lines. We don't normally get absolutely massive incidents, and we don't often get pictures sent through either, unless we're specifically requesting them to help us diagnose or talk somebody through what's happening. So it's not as exciting as the massive explosions, because usually we're getting called after that's already happened and there's a bit of cleanup to go through. How do we go about doing it? Or something along these lines. It's not running away without looking at an explosion. I'm afraid it's more of a, now let's take a sort of careful, measured approach. How can we tackle this one? I still find it exciting, and at the end of a shift, myself and colleagues will swap notes saying, "Oh, I had a good one here. There were some good learning points here," and it was quite exciting how it changed halfway through when I realised it was so much bigger than it initially seemed. And it's nice when you occasionally end up finding news stories, and you think, "Oh, I advised on that one," and you think, "I've helped these people in that situation." So it's a bit more of the it's a bit more behind the scenes than the James Bond explosions, I'm afraid.
Fab. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today, and hope they found Kieran's talk as interesting as I did as well. So hopefully we'll see you again at another Ask a Chemist in the future. So thank you.
Maybe. Thank you. Goodbye.